Hi, I'm Mr. Kangas, and today we're going to take a look at Chapter 12, Section 8, Counting Outcomes. And really there are two different ways to count outcomes. Both of them have their uses, but in this video we're specifically going to be talking about how to use a tree diagram to count outcomes. Now the instant drawback to a tree diagram is it is not good for larger problems. So, I mean, if you're getting up into problems that have 20, 30, 40 outcomes, or hundreds of outcomes, or thousands of outcomes, a tree diagram isn't really useful to you because it's going to take so long to construct that diagram that it just won't be worth your time. So, the tree diagram is great for smaller problems and on smaller problems and to help yourself wrap your mind around the problem, because sometimes the best approach to a larger problem is to create a smaller version of the problem. So the way a tree diagram works, let's say we wanted to count the outcomes to a skateboard company, and the question is how many different types of skateboards can be made from 3 decks. So that would be the board you stand on. And we're going to call those decks A, B, and C. And you have a choice between 2 different types of wheels. So there are 2 different wheels. We're going to call those D and E. So you can choose between one of 3 decks and one of 2 sets of wheels. And they want to know how many different combinations or how many different skateboards can you make. So in other words, you need to go through all the different possible combinations of decks and wheels here in order to create the number of skateboards that you can create here. So you're going to use a tree diagram, and so what you're going to do is you're going to start off. You have to either choose decks or wheels. What is your first choice going to be? I'm going to choose wheels just because there is a smaller number of wheels than there are decks. So it can sometimes that can help make the tree look a little bit neater. So you have a choice between either wheel D or wheel E. So there's the start of my tree. And sometimes people like to put a little connector here just to start the tree. So here's the start of my tree. I have 2 choices. I can choose D or E for my wheels. So choice 1, wheels. Now for each wheel, I have 3 different decks I can choose. I can choose A, B, or C. So I can have wheel D with deck A, deck B, or deck C, or I can have wheel E with deck A, deck B, or deck C. So total, I have 6 different combinations. And so sometimes when you're making these trees, as you go down the tree, it's actually pretty common for you, instead of just writing A, B, and C, because you're doing wheel D with deck A, B, or C, so a lot of people will put the D next to your choice. So let me space that out a little bit better. That way you know you have wheel D and deck A, wheel D, deck B, wheel D, deck C. So the first letter is always your first choice. So I chose D first, and the second letter is my second choice. So I went from wheels to decks. So here's my wheel, here's my deck. Here's my wheel, here's my deck. So over here I would have an E in front of all these. And so that's the basic concept to a tree. And so at the end, you just count the endpoints of all the branches. So here's an endpoint, 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 endpoint. Each one of those represents a skateboard combination. And so you have a total of 6 skateboards. Now, based off of this, we have a total of 6 different skateboards, and some of us may be starting to catch on what is the other method that we can use to count to to count outcomes with, which is a much more effective method in a lot of instances, because you can count outcomes well into the thousands, and it's a very simple process. Whereas this is a very laborious process. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work to get through. So in the next video, we're going to be talking about how to count outcomes just using some simple multiplication. We're not going to do trees. Trees can be nice sometimes because they give you a visual, and when you're finding probability of an event occurring, a tree can be really nice to kind of help you figure that out as well. But we will talk more about that in future videos, so tune in for the next video, which will be on the second method for counting outcomes. And that method is called the fundamental counting principle.